All right, John. Obviously, the story of the draft was Shedeur Sanders. It just dominated. Mel Kiper lost his mind. um, so I want to start with this, and you know this. So basically, I would have drafted Shedeur Sanders if I was the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I don't think they needed a defensive lineman as much as they needed in a division with Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson, in a conference with Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, and Patrick Mahomes and C.J. Stroud. They don't have a quarterback room of note. I think Will Howard's a backup in the NFL. So congratulations on getting another defensive lineman, but I would have drafted Shedeur Sanders. That said, once he started falling in the draft, I started making calls. I went on the internet, and it was very interesting. So two general managers who I hold in sort of my like circle of trust and I think are really as good as general managing gets in this league. Not Howie Roseman, but there's another eight guys or so that I really like. You know, a couple of them had said to my friend Steve Keim, because Steve Keim had asked, because he had Jalen Milroe as a client for Clutch Sports, and he had asked a couple of GM friends, hey, about a month ago, what do you make of Shedeur Sanders? And both said, you know, his tape isn't great. Like, you know, there's a lot of stuff you don't like on his tape, and he's not a great athlete. But that said, I still think he's accurate enough to be in a bad quarterback draft class to not fall to where he fell. But I'm gonna start with this, which I talked about on my own YouTube, pod this weekend, is that when a guy does fall and you're seeking answers for it, you start going back and examining things, and things also start to surface after the first round. Stories start to surface that were not talked about pre first round. Clearly, the interviews were worse than it wasn't just a story that bothered people. It was true, and there were more than one instance of a bad interview. But I had said this too, is that once you didn't see Shedeur Sanders as a starter, because of the smoke and noise around him, with Deion, basically his dad at Super Bowl week, saying, we're going to control this. There are certain teams we're not going to play for. Travis is going to go 1. My son's going to go 3. That I did wonder, John, like the Tebow or Cam Newton effect. If he's not the starter, do you want the Deion noise as a backup for a year? Do you think that is what teams thought about once you got to the second round? Is okay, now he's a backup. And I'm not sure teams love that Tebow level noise, celebrity quarterback backup
Yeah, I mean,
stuff.
obviously, like you, I did a lot of digging these last couple days because I liked him as a player, and I just assumed he'd go somewhere between like 10 and 45, maybe
Yeah,
in the
same
first
here.
round, maybe in the second round. So when he precipitous fall to the fifth round, you got to start texting around. And you've said this for a long time. Quarterbacks are held to an unfair standard. It's also why they make $50 million
Right.
dollars a year. I mean, it's
That's right.
also why I would say they are now viewed as the biggest celebrity in sports, right up there with like, I mean, a level of like LeBron and Steph Curry immediately.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I would say from what I've heard, he had one of the worst off seasons that these teams have ever seen from a quarterback prospect. And that could be from a first rounder to a seventh rounder because
Right, right.
they all act, you are a product of your class, right? So if I'm a good looking girl and I walk into a bar and there are 10 supermodels, I'm not going to be viewed as highly as if I walk into a room with a bunch of ugly people. And in this class, it was a bunch of high level cats. Cam Ward, I know people with the Titans, they loved him. Drew Brees said this a long
Yeah.
time ago. Playing quarterback is like 70-30, intangible, off the field, upstairs, 30, my physical qualities. Peyton Manning couldn't beat me or you in a race. He didn't have a big arm. Tom Brady said, yeah, I couldn't play any other position in high school football beside quarterback. So this
Right.
class from Jalen Milroe, people love the guy. Dylan Gabriel, he had to be one of the favorites when it came to the coaching staffs. Obviously, the Will Howards, the Riley Leonards. These guys are the most impressive people of the entire draft when these coaches and these GMs
Right.
are meeting with them. They leave the room and these coaches go, God, I wish Riley Leonard and Will Howard were better players because they
That's
get
right.
drafted in the fifth, sixth, seventh round. Most people think, yeah, he's probably not going to be in the NFL long, but we love the guy. And Shedor's
Yeah.
off the field is not bad. Never been in trouble or anything. But when you act,
Right.
there are only so many teams, right? It's a supply demand thing. Well, 6 teams last year drafted quarterbacks in the top 6. They're immediately out. There are several quarterbacks on rookie contracts. They're not going to be in the mix. And then the veteran teams, Andy Reid, the Bills, the Ravens, they're just consumed with trying to win the Super Bowl right now. So it's a small group, right? So
Yeah.
the small group, well, those were the people he met with and clearly turned them off. And McShay's been coming out with this report. What happened with the Giants of like, I don't need you, that never happens. And I think it's become popular because if you look at these comments online, it's like, go against the establishment, go against the man. It's like, guys, this is a business that if you're decent, you will make $40 million a year. Find me another industry that pays that level. And if you're like Cam Ward, who was
Yeah.
viewed as a 5th-round pick, comes back, does all the right things, plays well, people love the guy. He's a first-round pick. He's going to get $40 million guaranteed. So if he stinks, if he's terrible, Trey Lance, a good example. People love the guy, couldn't play, but he made $40 million. So to carry yourself, listen, we all look up to our parents, right? Or whoever raises us, and he looks up to his dad.
Yeah.
His dad is one of the greatest players of all time. And his dad can act
Right.
however he wants, just like great players can always act however they want. Because in a business like pro sports, there's only so many of them. His son was not that, and I think that really turned people off. The other thing that really bothers me is this narrative of like this is the NFL pushing back against NIL. It's like, guys, Cam Ward just made like $3 million playing at Miami. The NFL, every GM's a millionaire. Every assistant coach now is probably a millionaire. And obviously the head coaches are all making 10 to 50. They don't care at all. Travis Hunter, I Googled his NIL deal. I mean, it was reported between $4 and $5 million. It's about being a good person. I mean, all these kids in college, the entire first and second round, they were driving Range Rovers and G-Wagons last year in college. It's not about the money or the NIL. It's just like, one, there were a lot of red flags guys that were drafted well above Shedeur Sanders. Those guys were viewed as good players.
Yeah.
Now, I think Shedeur's a solid prospect, but what I've
So do I.
heard about the way he's acting, like he would be an immediate turnoff to any human being, right? In any industry. That's not how young people act. And I think they tried to change their tactics from what I've heard the last like month, but it was too late. It's hard to pivot. And again, you're just compared, like they view you in a group with Jalen Milroe and Dylan Gabriel. And so
Right.
that's who you're compared to. You're not compared to Cam Ward. He has nothing in common with you, but people like him on and off the field. So the group you're compared to, it's like, well, we love the people. What's up with this guy? Anytime it's like, what's up with this guy? And you play quarterback, like that's a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. So I talked to an NFL general manager yesterday, and he said, Colin, he said, the conversation, we talk about players in this league. The conversation with quarterbacks is a separate conversation. We talk about quarterbacks like I would as a GM talk about coaching prospects. I'm talking about your temperament, your leadership. This GM said, when I hire coaches, very rarely will you get Andy Reid or Kyle Shanahan's scheme excellence. You're hiring CEOs. McVay's a CEO. Dan Campbell's not a scheme genius. He's a CEO. And he said, so he goes, that's what a quarterback is. He's your CEO on the field. So temperament, maturity, do guys rally around him? So the interview, how do you hire Sean McVay and not let him out of the building? It's not his resume. It's his interview. And so I do think, and this stuff, obviously Brian Daboll, the Giants, is going to say, no, the interview was great, because Brian Daboll has to go back on that Colorado campus over the next 4 or 5 years or next 10 years. So you'll never hear a coach bang on a university or a coach, because that coach is going to have 4 to 5 NFL players the next year. So you just swallow it and go, yeah, it was a great interview. But I think there's more than enough smoke here that process wasn't great. And I'll say it again. I do not like, and again, I did not think this would be an issue, but I was forced to talk about it once he's dropping out of the first, the second, the third, the fourth. Then I'm forced to talk about it. And my take was, Well, if you're really making me pick what's a problem, I do think Deion during Super Bowl week exclaiming, this is on our terms. It wasn't until mid to late March that Deion went, okay, he can go anywhere. And I think it pissed people off. I know one team that was totally turned off. And remember, you go into a draft, John, as you noted earlier, there's usually, like, for instance, the Rams. The Rams decided before this draft they were going after a quarterback next year. That the Rams made a decision in-house. We probably need to get one in-house, but we're going to go for it next year. That's why they made that trade with Atlanta to get two first next year, because their first will be deep. So they're looking for a top 12 to 15 first, and if they have to use both to get like the second pick, because you're going to have Drew Aller, Clemson's quarterback, Arch Manning. So if they want to get up to like third or fourth in the draft, they need a second one. So the Rams, there's about 7 teams a year that need a quarterback, either as a starter or a backup. And the Rams immediately decided with their trade, we're getting ours next year. The NBA 82-game grind is done. Now the real fun begins. The NBA playoffs. Love them. They're here. Time for drama, clutch moments, Steph Curry, LeBron, jaw-dropping plays. I can't wait. If you're looking to make the playoffs even more exciting, DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered. They're the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Playing games all the way to the finals. Now's the time to back your favorite players and teams as they chase glory. So all season long, DraftKings has been the go-to spot for NBA player props. That doesn't stop now. If you want to make your playoff experience even more intense, try placing a bet on your favorite player's performance. Will they drop 30, 40? Who knows? Or more. It's your call. If you're ready to place your first bet, download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Takes 90 seconds. Lock in your bets, and let's make the playoffs unforgettable. Here's something special for first-timers. DraftKings customers that are new, bet $5. That's it, $5, and get 200 in bonus bets instantly. Just make it a playoff run to remember with DraftKings. Download their Sportsbook app. Takes 90 seconds. The code's Colin, C-O-L-I-N. That is code Colin. New customers get $200 in bonus bets. Betting just $5. Only on DraftKings, the crown is yours.
I think if you just looked at all the starters in the league that teams are either obviously elated to have or feel good about, I don't think you would find one that isn't basically an A+ off the field. And I think the one guy who's clearly mature, I don't know if Kyler Murray would fall under A+, but he's clearly matured. I mean, I'm now living in Arizona, seeing the comments from him. And from a talent standpoint, I mean, you're older than me. He's got to be one of the most unique talents in the history of pro sports. I mean, he's one of the great blue chip physical attribute talents in any sport ever. We won't see a guy again get drafted in the top 10 and number 1 over court. He's 5'9". So it's like, yeah, it was a learning curve, and his maturity, he's matured. Some guys mature slower. We've seen Baker and some of these guys, but for the most part, they are A+ everything in terms of leadership, intangibles, work ethic. People just like being around. There's no question. It never comes up. The last unit in the building I want to think ever about is my overall quarterback unit, not even just my starter, just the group. I know I'm going to have a couple D-line issues, maybe a wide receiver. The quarterback issue, it's the last thing on my mind beside like an injury or something that I have to make like a tangible transaction for. And he basically handed them, like, they started seeing what they see in other positions, and they're like, this is insane. And this notion that like the collusion and stuff, it was honestly kind of embarrassing by a lot of people around the NFL. I think former players and stuff, I think it was bad look by a lot of people that have no fucking clue what they're talking about.
Well, it's you and I, basically. You worked in the league, and I have more sources. There are 2 conversations that go on about the NFL. One is public, one is private. I'm talking to 2 people today. Those conversations never hit the air, but they're giving me background on stuff. I do not think we both like Shedeur as a player, like not love. I don't think he's a bad guy. I want to clarify. I don't think he's a bad guy, but no one does. I don't think he's a bad guy, but I do. I said this on the show Friday, paying for the quarterback draft room with legendary all over it. It's like, bro, come on. Just the New York Giant shoes. It's like, dude, just scale back a little until you're drafted. Then do whatever you want. And then you combine it with his dad, who did not, I've been saying this, quarterback dads become pageant mom. Then his dad in January and February during Super Bowl interviews is saying, there's just some teams we're not going to play for. It's like, Dad, You're not helping
Well, I'll give you
here.
two examples. I mean, your boys with Kime, he's representing in clutches Jalen Milroe. Everyone that met Jalen Milroe
Yeah.
is like, he's not even accurate. And they're like, we want to like this guy. I mean, the best example in recent memory is Chris Ballard, who I would say the Colts place a pretty high premium on the person. And I remember hearing all this about Anthony Richardson. They're like, I wanted to not like Anthony Richardson based on his tape, but then you start meeting him in the draft process, the league started to like him. And
I heard this about E.J. Manuel years ago. I met E.J. Manuel. You fell in love with a
most
human.
quarterbacks is like, God, I love this guy. Like, hold your girlfriend tight because you're just like, those are the type of people they gravitate toward. And this is the first one in recent memory that turned everyone off. Like this was universal. And again, when I say everyone, Andy Reid and the Eagles aren't spending time scouting this guy closely. So it's a small group of teams that he needed. And so you go to the fifth round, like he is now, we could just talk about the room. It's very difficult. There are only so many reps at practice. So we know Joe Flacco is going to be the starter. And then they got this group. I think it's pretty clear that the coaching staff and the GM, two Ivy League guys, they like Dillon Gabriel. That's why they drafted him in the third round. I think it's fair to say Jason Lloyd, who's like the Tim Kawakami of the Cleveland area, covers all these Cleveland sports, wrote a pretty good article on The Athletic yesterday. This was clearly an owner pick. Because in what world? Look at the reaction.
I was going to ask
you. Look at the reaction on Twitter. They got posted in the draft room. Stefanski looked like he wanted to jump off a bridge. Andrew Berry's comments in the press conference was like, yeah, the value, but the way they talked about Dillon Gabriel and the other players, we have a history now with Jimmy Haslam. Like Deshaun Watson was out until Jimmy said, no, we're doing this. And now you get into another situation where it's like you drafted a quarterback, kind of take a step back. You're going to have a couple draft picks, but Jimmy Haslam, because in what world does it make sense? Because you go, well, in any other position, you take multiple quarterbacks. True. But in practice, I can rotate my tight ends or my running backs or my defensive linemen literally every play. If you go to an NFL or a college practice, your ones and twos, if there are 12 reps during a session, the ones get 8 and the twos get 4. You don't have that many spots for like the 6 quarterbacks. So how Gabriel's drafted higher, he's going to get more spots. I think it's just a weird. It feels like it's got Jimmy Haslam written all over it, and you see the look on Stefanski's face, like, guys, get me out of here. This is crazy. Because how could you go from Deshaun Watson to then taking a quarterback in the third round to then taking him in the fifth with everything that comes along with it? It doesn't make that much sense. Also, from a I don't know. I think it's just a clunky, weird spot. I don't. It's not out of Shedeur's control, but it didn't make sense. No one takes a quarterback in the third and the fifth. It never happens. It's a numbers game. You can't practice.
My guess is Flacco wins the job, and Shedeur is probably more impressive in practice. I mean, I think he's better than Dillon Gabriel.
I do
I just
too.
think
I
he
do
is.
too. But this is the other element. If Jimmy does force them to do it, which to me, I agreed with the take. I'm like, that's what it felt like. You could still, it's not like Jimmy sets the practice schedule, who's getting the reps. So you can manipulate it as a coach. Happens all over the league, right? You talk to some of these GMs like a player, the coach likes a player, and you can argue all you want in the room, but at practice, the GM doesn't get to run practice. So I'm with you. Like, I think Shedeur is a better player than Dillon Gabriel. I think drafting Dillon Gabriel in the third is pretty bold.
I didn't love that pick.
So my theory was they're no dummies. They've been around Jimmy long enough. They realize that, like, as Shedeur falls, he's going to force them to take Shedeur Sanders. So they go, listen, we'd love to take this guy in the fourth or fifth. Let's take him now, so it kind of shuts him up. But then Shedeur just kept plummeting, and they didn't have a choice once they got to the fifth round when he's like, you got to do it. So my theory is they overdrafted him to shut up the owner, and because any visual you saw of Stefanski and Barry, he's right over their backs, right? You see most rooms, the owner's next to him or in the corner, just like hanging out. He's right behind him, kind of hovering. I mean, that's a bizarre place, Colin. It really is.
Fubo, as you guys know, is my favorite way to watch live sports. NFL, baseball, NBA, college sports, baseball Masters around the corner. The reason I love Fubo, I can watch it at home. I can watch it in an Uber. I can watch it on a plane. And a lot of times I'm moving like you. Go to FuboTV.com/Colin. Fubo, Fubo, FuboTV.com/Colin to get $50 off 2 months of Fubo. I watch it 4 days a week. I mean, a classic example is, I'm going to an airport and a game starts and I've got a flight after my show Thursday. Well, I'm watching it in the Uber and then I'm watching it until I hit security. And then 4 minutes later, I'm watching it after security, waiting for the plane, on the plane. I mean, I can't carry around a flat screen TV. Yeah, I mean, it's, just to show you how much intangibles matter that you talked about earlier. Think about this. Baker Mayfield won a playoff game for the Cleveland Browns, and not only won a playoff game, beat their number one rival, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they moved off him, not because he couldn't play, because of the intangibles. Think about that. Just say Cleveland Browns win a playoff game over the Steelers. That should give you 3 contracts. They moved off him. So when people listen to this and think, well, the intangibles, no, it's a 70-30 intangible league when it comes to quarterbacks. Baker has now matured, and they love him in Tampa, and I love the fit. But they moved off of him, Andrew Berry and Stefanski, because he kept inflaming press conferences, and he just wasn't ready to be like lead a franchise. So your point is, I've said this for years about Dak Prescott. He's not an impressive thrower of the football. His intangibles are amazing. His tangibles are mediocre. Dan Mullen came on my show, had him at Mississippi State. He's like, yeah, he's not impressive throwing the football. I mean, we never thought, oh, he throws the best football on Mississippi State. His intangibles were through the roof. So this stuff,
I mean, look at Purdy.
Matters.
I would say his intangibles, he's got Patrick Mahomes level intangibles. All right. I mean, Sam Darnold has talked now for 2 years about what he's taught him off the field. Purdy's like 25 years old. So you can get by with average characteristics, which Shedeur has. Dak, I would say Cousins, it would fall under that, right? Jared Goff's not exactly quick or a huge arm. By being elite off the field, your study habits, how you are as a leader, how you are as, the captain, as the guy that everyone's following. I think Tampa really benefits from getting the version of Baker that they have now, who is like, I think everything John Dorsey wanted, and Jason Light now benefits from that. So listen, where you get drafted doesn't define your career. People freak out always. And you and I have talked about this, like getting drafted in the 3rd round is some travesty. It's like, guys, there's a small percentage of people that are even playing high level D1 football. And you see by the draft picks, if you don't play in the SEC or the Big Ten, you're at a huge disadvantage trying to get to the league. So like, listen, he's a 5th round pick. Did he fall a couple rounds? Sure. But if he's good, the cream usually rises in the NFL.
Yeah, and I do think he is a 1st or a 2nd round pick. I was watching the draft, and there were 3 players that jumped out to me that I think this signifies that it wasn't a star draft, but it was a starter draft. Cody Simon gets drafted by Arizona, a team that had a good draft, in the 4th. He was a tremendous inside linebacker for Ohio State. He was in on every play, every run play he was there. Damian Martinez, the Seahawks get him, the Miami running back, in the 7th round. He averaged 4.5 yards a carry. Jabbar Muhammad for Oregon, a starting corner for Oregon, the Jags got him as an undrafted free agent. Now he's not a great athlete. His vertical went from 23 to like 30 in the combine, so he really worked at it. But those are not maybe great players. But in any draft that Cody Simon for Ohio State's going in the middle 4th round, to me, that's a pretty decent draft. That is a football player.
To me, it's not. I don't think people would bet their careers on the high end, like a bunch of all pros and Hall of Famers. But I think when you look at the 2nd and 3rd round, and you and I are degenerate Saturday football watchers, there are a lot of guys that are going to play in the NFL for a long time. I mean, the amount of running backs and defensive linemen that were drafted on the 2nd day. I mean, both Ohio State kids, one started at Ole Miss, Junkins and Henderson. I think are both going to be really, really good players in the NFL. And there are countless defensive linemen that were taken that are going to be high-level players. Receivers, I mean, we see this every year. I mean, the amount of guys that are going to go in the 3rd, 4th, 5th. Tez Walker, the wide receiver from Oregon. I might be screwing up his name. First name Tez, who's Bo Nix's former roommate, who like they kind of adopted him. He's like 160 pounds. That guy's a fantastic player. And I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers got him in the seventh round. So sometimes guys just fall because they're small, they have a bad combine, they have, an injury that limited their tape as seniors. And we see it all the time. A guy that's a fifth rounder all of a sudden is way better than the second rounder. It's why you and I talked about the Van Pelt rant about the grades. I've been going to these training camps for so long. You get there, you're so excited to see, like, oh, let's look at the first rounder. And then all of a sudden you're like, who's that? You're like, that's the undrafted free agent. He ends up making the team by the middle of the year. He's the starter. So it's the NFL. This is not basketball, where if you're a first round pick, minimum you're going to play. In football, like you're going to get more time as the seventh overall pick or the 15th overall pick. But if you can play and you're the third rounder, if you're the fifth rounder, as training camp goes and as preseason goes, by September you're already in the mix. That's how fast it happens. And then we know how many guys get injured, and all of a sudden you got three guys that are rookies starting.
Well, the other thing is, especially, I've heard this for years too. Some guys, it takes them a year to get the playbook down.
Yeah.
I mean, there are, but not just at quarterback, but there have been, I don't want to pick on players, but I mean, I have talked to executives in the league or coaches in the league, and they're like, we really like him, but we didn't, their coaching staff at some school, whatever school is, they didn't tell us that, he can struggle, in memorization, that he tends to, be somebody that struggles to kind of stay on the same page. He's a little bit of an ad-libber. There's a receiver that I think of a few years ago that a team drafted, and everybody was like, why isn't he playing? And it was just a matter of the playbook. And so some guys come in and, they just are ready to play. The other thing is fit matters in the NFL. It really matters a lot. And I think the really good organizations have continuity. How many years have Brett Veach and Andy Reid been together, or Les Snead and Sean McVay, or Shanahan and John Lynch? Although Shanahan kind of runs the draft, I mean, he has the ultimate say. But the truth is, when you're there are times, Trent Baalke, obviously, in Jacksonville and San Francisco, there are times the GM and the head coach do not like each other, or you have this constant change where the GM didn't hire the head coach, and there's a lot of careers at stake and a lot of money at stake. So continuity is really important because you get this hotshot Jaguars GM. I thought that was too big of a swing for your first move, but he's got some hubris. He's got young, good-looking kid confidence. And, you think the coach has a say in this stuff, but what if he is just sort of I'm going to do what I'm going to do guy? So I think continuity, say what you want about the Steelers. They draft well. Well, it's been a lot of the same people.
I was
for a long, long time. So they all know what each other likes, and they're not competing against one another.
I know the Jags, some of his videos go viral. The NFL, this is pretty close-knit group. And I think, some of his comments, listen, you make a trade, you make a bold trade. No one has a problem. They can agree or disagree. But the way he described Travis Hunter, I mean, I got a text today from someone in a war room that said, on our trade chart, they got absolutely fleeced on that trade. It wasn't even close. And sometimes you pay a premium to move up to get a quarterback, but when you pay a premium to move up to get Travis Hunter, when you don't know, these guys are both brand new. I went on a walk today and I called a couple people in the league because I knew we were going to talk and just pick their brain.
So did I.
And I asked them, I said, what's one thing that you really, really struggle with? And you spoke about the players struggling to learn. And he says, I have a hard time with just dumb players. Because I learned early on when I got to the NFL, you can't crush a guy because he has like a 2.0 GPA. Well, if he took Jason Kidd like 7 times to pass the SAT, he's one of the smartest basketball players ever. This is football, basketball, baseball. Your intelligence in the sport doesn't always translate to a classroom. I don't even argue most classrooms can be a little overrated. Like, who cares how you score on a standardized test? But some people just, are a little smarter than others, right? And he's look at the All Pros and the Pro Bowl guys and just watch most of their interviews. Most guys, obviously there are some smarter than others, but aren't many dumb guys. And learning in the NFL when it comes to mental and physical fatigue, the combination of that, this is not college. You're playing 17 games, you're doing a long preseason. It's the meetings actually now in football, in the Jimmy Johnson, Bill Walsh, Bill Parcells days, a lot of time on the practice field. You could really out-tough a guy. You're not in pads that often anymore. It's actually turned much more into a mental game. I've watched way too many GM press conferences the last 3 days, but one thing Howie talked about was like the game has become such more of like a chess match and open field and speed.
Yes.
It's no longer, Bill Romanowski meeting Lorenzo Neal in the hole. Like not that teams don't run the ball, but it's a spread game. It's an offensive coordinator playing chess, the defensive coordinator with his chess pieces. So intelligence and the speed in which you play, that's why you get really tired because you're running nonstop against all these guys. And smarter guys also typically like you can get in trouble off the field and not be a bad guy if you're kind of dumb. You
Right.
just make bad decisions, and
Right.
and it's hard to balance. Some guys, can overcome that. Some guys never do. And you and I have talked to enough coaches over the years. Guys getting crushed in the media, like, why aren't you playing so and so? It's like he doesn't know what to do. So if I throw him out there, my quarterback and my center and my star tight end are going to freak out because this guy's going to screw us up
Listen,
nonstop.
and now for our next segment, Whiskey Business, brought to you by Green River Whiskey, the official whiskey of the Colin Cowherd podcast. If you want to enjoy life's simple pleasures, reach for Green River Whiskey. Whether it's rye whiskey, single barrel bourbon, you're getting over a century of craftsmanship packed into every bottle. Hop on over to greenriverwhiskey.com and discover a legend in a bottle today. Well, I mean, two stories. Tom Brady, one of the reasons the Patriots were absolutely dreadful on drafting wide receivers because Tom didn't want to babysit kids into the league. It didn't mean those kids weren't good players, but Tom was hard. Like Tom was not going to wait for you to figure it out. So not that it's on Tom, but a lot of receivers struggled with Tom. I don't believe that the New England Brain Trust just couldn't draft receivers. Tom made it hard because he was very impatient. Come ready to play. The other thing is, I asked Jimmy Johnson once in the green room at Fox. I would get there early and I'd pepper him with questions. And Jimmy taught me more football than anybody I've ever met. And I said, what's the most important thing? The number one quality. And I was surprised by it because, those Miami programs were considered renegade. And he goes, oh, intelligence. He goes, Colin, I think I'm a good coach. If you don't take to my coaching, I'm just an average coach. If you don't take to Andy Reid's coaching or Sean McVay's coaching, well, then those are less successful coaches. You have to get people that you can insert stuff and they can pick it up quickly. I can remember when Randy Moss came to the Patriots. Dude, it was one practice and they were like, yep, he knows the offense. It was like Randy just knew the game of football. It was funny. I remember people asking, I mean, I can remember the interviews, and it was just like, yeah, he just kind of picked everything up. He didn't have to tell Randy Moss anything twice. Like he just instinctually knew what to do as a football player.
Obviously this guy, can be a pain sometimes and, got some stuff going on right now, Tyreek Hill. But I remember talking to Andy Reid years ago, picking his brain on draft players. Or, it was like a month before the draft. And we started talking about stuff like this. And he says, people don't understand how smart Tyreek Hill is in terms of offense. I tell him one thing, he's picked it up for the rest of the year. So it's like, why did they have so much success? Obviously, he's got special physical skills. They could do everything with him. Why do some guys that are these great talents, like, why aren't they using them more? He doesn't know what he's doing. He's like a Randy Moss, a Tyreek Hill. You tell him one time in the middle of August, I pull that out in November in a tie game in the fourth quarter when it's freezing cold against the Ravens. Boom. He's like, yeah, coach, no problem. Run it. Run it again. He comes to me with ideas, and that separates these guys. Most of the best players you look around at positions, I'd even say historically, are football geniuses, from Ed Reed to Ronnie Lott, any position, right? Look at Travis Kelce. Him and Patrick Mahomes make up routes on. It's like, why can't anyone cover Travis? Because they're not running plays. He runs whatever you go the opposite way. And it's from a football intellect standpoint. And he's a good example. And this is why the draft is so hard. He was a major red flag coming out of college. He's even talked about it. And he matured as a human, but in terms of his football IQ, like, it's why some of these guys are going to fail that can play. It's because they're not going to mature or they're not going to be able to handle football. And some of these guys, like the Ohio State crew of guys, I think is a bunch of on defense, bunch of higher character, tough, physical guys. But I think a lot of people view them, their physical attributes aren't elite. But you watch. I bet the group, the middle linebacker, the couple pass rushers, play in the league for like a decade, right? Because that stuff usually matters. Now, I don't know how good of a players they're going to be, but they're going to be around for a while. Guarantee it.
Yeah, when I watched Cody Simon play for Ohio State, it was amazing. It was as if he knew where it was going. You would watch teams run motion, and Cody Simon would just fill a gap, move, and the ball always came to him. That was one of the players. He was one of my favorite players in the draft. I think Ohio State has so many good players. And to your point, these Ohio State guys, Simon is such a character guy. And Emeka
Yeah.
Ibuka, like A
Sawyer,
plus 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 plus
JTT,
character
that
guys.
crew.
Yeah, just that's and so credit to Ohio State and Ryan Day, and because they have created a program where those guys come out and they're ready to go, highly functional, very
Colin, the
coachable.
first 38
So
picks, they had 6 of them. And their 2 best players in the program are still in the program in Downs and Jeremiah Smith. It's like, no wonder they won the national championship.
So I don't know about best draft and draft grades. I will say this. The Rams and Cleveland both got a first round pick next year. That
Okay.
really helps. Okay, so if you can get a first round pick and get a bunch of good players, which the Rams and Cleveland did, it's hard to argue that's not the best draft. But I thought the Seahawks did really well. Gray, Zeeble, the
Yeah.
guard starter. Nick, is it
I just call him the DB from South
hard-hitting-
Carolina that the NFL loves. They think this. Everyone
Dude, he
speaks
is-
highly of this guy.
Major range starter. Elijah Arroyo, probably a rotational tight end and a starter very quickly. Jalen Milroe, I was told today that Seattle will use him as a rookie in 6 to 8 plays per game. They're going to use him. They want him on the field. You get Sam Darnold in the offseason, then Damian Martinez in the 7th. I mean, I look at the Seahawks draft and I was like, you've got 3 starters, the most athletic backup quarterback in league history. You went and got Sam Darnold in free agency. I think that's an upgrade. Maybe it's a small upgrade over Geno Smith. And then you get Damian Martinez, who will be your 3rd back. But because the Seahawks backs tend to get banged up, he actually will play. I thought Seattle had a really, really good weekend. Is there any team that jumped out to you?
Everyone I texted, Seattle's the first team they bring up. Now, John Schneider is extremely highly thought of in that community. Like people, they just like the guy and they think he's really, really good at his job. I think a lot of people, I think the Raiders are just trying to get the train back on the tracks. And listen, we can debate, did they taken the running back too high? The second round guy they took, the TCU wide receiver Beck, whose brother had died in the New Orleans attack. He started at LSU, he transferred to TCU. They're just getting for a while when they had Mayock and Gruden, and this carried into Josh McDaniels, like he had to coach these guys. They were taking some crazy flyers on individuals that the league was like, what are you doing? And part of just being a solid team is just having some dependable players. And I think for a long time, they have just, Al Davis kind of carried into the franchise, even though he was long gone. Obviously, you get Gruden back, who's basically his mentor is Al Davis. I think you get John Spytek, who, like we talked about, Jason Light, who I think we could say their draft too, but their draft every year. He's one of the best. John Spytek is, to me, the next Jason Light, John, Les Snead, like a scout. John Lynch is an example of a guy, different route. Howie's viewed more like this hybrid, can do a bunch of stuff. John Spytek, his background is in scouting. He understands players. I don't know how good their team's going to be, but I just think they're going to be solid, where they have had a lot of holes. Because it's like, wait, you just drafted Alex Leatherwood in the 17th overall. Half the league didn't have the guy on the draft board. What are you doing? And I think those days you kind of just get away from. And one thing I've come around on Genty, again, I'm pro Genty the player. I just think taking a running back really high is pretty risky. Is I watched Pete Carroll talk about it. I was like, he's got a pretty good history of like picking running backs. Because if you count USC as a pro program, which it basically was, like he kind of knows what he's doing at that position. So I would imagine it's going to work, especially with Chip and his. I mean, Chip's a run first, ideally offensive coordinator, and Tampa is another example. I just think that team has kind of set the bar. I mean, they're going to be better this year. I know they've won the division a couple years in a row, but they had a lot of injuries last year and they barely won that division. It wouldn't shock me if they win it. I could see Carolina like being better than some of the Saints got a lot of issues.
Did you see the story? Carolina got T-Mac, the receiver from Arizona. Did you see the story that and they didn't really go after a receiver until the 7th round, but the Rams were interested in moving up to get him. They were interested. So, I mean, the Rams were not really in the receiver hunting ground, right? They got the guy from Pittsburgh in round 7. The Rams were interested in T-Mac. Now, I had heard that, like Will Johnson, he had turned off some teams, but he didn't turn off the Rams and he didn't turn off Carolina. As you know, it takes one team. I mean, the Giants really like Jaxson Dart. My people were very hit and miss on Jaxson Dart, mostly miss. They didn't see him as a first-round quarterback. Well, the Giants did. So it doesn't take that many people. Everybody liked that South Carolina safety the Seahawks got. Like everybody in the league liked
Malachi Starks.
Everybody
like universal praise.
Sorry to interrupt this great video, but please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you. Now back to the video. Yeah. So it's so I want to
So you don't think the Rams would have taken Jaxson Dart? Because I saw someone say that that's why the Giants traded up, because they were afraid that the Rams, and then obviously the Rams then backed up.
Well, the Rams, I asked Les over a text 6 months ago. I sent a mock draft to him, and he said it's probably, and Les said, and I can say it now, he goes, probably not a great year to need a quarterback in the first round. He said plenty of talented guys later. So once they gave up their first-round pick, I don't think they were going to draft Jaxson Dart. My intel is they weren't. They interviewed him, and he would have been able to sit for 2 years. But Jaxson Dart is a player. There's too many similarities to Zach Wilson, including the same high school and the same offense in high school. And I came back, and again, if the Giants like him, they like him. So I'm not going to, crush the Giants. I wouldn't have done it. But if you like him, you like him. And obviously, the Giants did, after that interview, were not into Shedeur. And then Jaxson Dart was the next most ready-to-play guy. When Lane Kiffin is your coach, and Lane gives you about 12 completions a game, just on scheme, okay, now I need you to hit 6 to 7 on your own. And there were games, I watched that Florida game when he crapped the bed. It was the biggest game for Ole Miss in a long time, and I think a lot of people watched that game, and that was a tough environment. So Jaxson had too many games against big games, and those are the games that, before you break down film, you're an NFL GM on a Saturday, Ole Miss plays LSU or Bama or Georgia, you're watching that football game. There's 20 NFL guys on that field. Jaxson didn't play well in all those games.
I also think it's important. I had heard Carolina felt very good about the Arizona wide receiver. And I think I had a couple people tell me this, when you have a smaller quarterback, it's easy for Tom Brady or Peyton Manning at 6'5", 6'6", or that whole kind of era of quarterbacks that are really tall to see everybody. I could have 4 Julian Edelmans and I can just pepper them. It's harder for Kyler Murray and Bryce Young to see those guys. So who's Kyler Murray's number one target? It's not actually the wide receiver. It's Trey McBride, because it's easier from my vantage point to see the head of a 6'4", 6'5" guy. So I think they really valued his size for their young quarterback. That kind of gave the franchise hope that who knows what would have happened if he did not look good down the stretch. We might have been talking about Carolina thinking about drafting Jaxson Dart. So he changed the narrative on his career. And I think the Rams, they took. I watched McVay talk about Ferguson, the tight end they took from Oregon. He really likes him. So I think they were really desperate to get some offensive. Now that Cooper's gone, to help Puka out with just a high-end offensive weapon. If they could ever get the running back to hold on to the ball, they'd have a pretty dominant offense.
Well, they also they didn't draft a corner, and that's an area of need. They went to another running back. So does that tell you that Blake Corum's a bust? They got Blake in the third. They went and got another running back. I know they've been frustrated with Kyron Williams' fumbles, but they drafted Blake Corum and did not play him much last year. No, he got injured late. But my takeaway, not drafting a corner and then taking the Auburn running back. So they got Devontae Williams. They went and got a tight end, and they went and got a running back. So it feels like to me this draft for the Rams was, listen, we've been paying attention to defense for 2 years. We got it. We're gonna let cornerback go for a year, tight end, running back, Devontae Adams. This is an offensive leaning draft. So I think, but I thought that was interesting. They took the Auburn running back, who I watched play. He's got some breakaway to him, but Blake Corum was a 3rd round pick. Why would you do that in a year you absolutely need a
It could
corner?
also be, Kieran Williams, big picture. Eventually, what are you going to pay him? Are you going to pivot off him? You have options. Running back is a position where a lot of teams they draft them basically every year. You just kind of keep churning it
Yep.
in and out. This was a good running back draft. I also think when you have, I mean, their defensive line has a chance to be really good if those two young guys take another
Yeah.
step. Good defensive line will make average corners look pretty good because they are peppering the quarterback. So
Yeah.
that makes it a little easier to just we'll figure it out in our defensive backfield with our defensive linemen becoming stars.
Yeah. So, um, I went and looked, and this is something that to me is really interesting. I went and looked at next year's mock first round draft. So there was Arch Manning, Clemson's quarterback, Drew Aller, the Penn State quarterback, Nussmeier, the LSU quarterback. There were four quarterbacks in the first round, and there will absolutely be two to three that
South
emerge
Carolina kid,
over the
someone to
course of a
keep an
season.
eye on. He's pretty interesting.
Yep. So, but it is interesting that I think the Browns, by moving down, and the Rams, by moving down in their first round, both told you we're going after quarterbacks next year. That's what makes the Browns so fascinating because, to your theory and point, was I really believe you're onto something that they signaled early. We're going big game hunting next year. I really do think you're probably right that they drafted Dylan Gabriel, overdrafted him because they didn't want Jimmy Haslam to say, hey, you remember? Because Haslam was Johnny Manziel guy. Haslam, flashy Johnny Manziel. Teams like New England took him off the board. Haslam was a Deshaun Watson guy. So I think, Steve Bisciotti of the Ravens has real pull, even on draft day for the Ravens, but he's really smart. Cleveland's history, as you pointed out with that owner, is they showed you by trading down to the fifth pick next year's the quarterback draft class. And I was told that, by the way, by a friend of Andrew Berry, is they just did not like
Well,
this class.
and think about isn't Haslam a big Tennessee guy? He's close friends with the Manning family and that circle. When they made that move, it was probably an easy sell for them because part of doing that job in that organization is you got to sell it to the owner. It's like next year we'll go after Arch, which I don't know where you stand. I feel it's a little. I get it comes with the territory of that last name. Like let's see him play some real games. He doesn't have the
I know.
biggest arm. I think someone's already said he's really more like his dad than his his brothers. He does not play like Peyton or Eli. I hope he's good. He's easy to root for, but like I watched his arm, it looked more like Shedeur Sanders than it did Josh Allen, and I think he's already being talked about like he's John Elway or something. And that
Yeah.
conference, you see how many people are getting drafted. I would imagine the SEC are going to lead it again. I haven't seen Texas' schedule, but I would imagine it's not easy. Who even knows? Maybe he's there for a couple years. He's only going to be what, a redshirt sophomore?
Let's end it with this. So I had said a year ago, Quinn Ewers was a first round pick. And I kept being sold on Quinn Ewers as a first round pick. And I kept saying all year, I don't get it. I think he's Drew Lock, maybe. I don't get it. So he got
I like
drafted in
Drew
like the
Lock
seventh
more,
round.
but I hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So that is the classic. When Shedeur was dropping, I was like, well, I mean, Will Howard threw for 1,000,000 yards and won a natty. He's not getting drafted. I mean, Jalen Milroe is one of the great athletes ever. He's not going first couple rounds. And I think Shador is better than both of them as a sit in the pocket, throw the ball. But it's just interesting to show you how things can change. Quinn Ewers was a five-star, best high school quarterback, goes to Texas, beats out Arch Manning a couple of years. And and my take was always when I watched him is he's got Texas's dominant O line, and he still won't throw the ball down the field. Like in the NFL, he reminded me of a less talented Derek Carr. I'm like, Derek, wind it up, go downfield. Like he was the classic check down guy with Texas protection. So that's an example where when people all freak out about people not being drafted, remember 2 years ago, Sam Howell in season, when the season started, people were like, Sam Howell, late first round. He went fifth round. So I think with quarterbacks, You start digging into film. Maybe there's some intangible stuff that makes you uneasy. I didn't want to overreact to Shedeur Sanders. I felt in the end when his dad on Super Bowl week was saying, we're going with our terms. He was talking directly to the 7 teams, most of them bad teams that needed a
I think,
quarterback.
for Quinn Ewers, I think when the schedule comes out and all these teams get together in training camp, there are probably, depending on the year, 6 or 7 games where basically every team is going to be represented at, and every GM, whether they're on the road or at home, is going to watch on television. And last year, that was Oregon, Ohio State, that was Georgia, Texas, that was Georgia, Alabama. It was a short list of games. You don't unsee Quinn Ewers against that Georgia team. You just don't. And we didn't unsee it with Carson Beck either. Everyone's like, I'm out on Carson Beck. And Jalen Milroe is a good example. People don't forget that first half he had against Georgia, where he looked like, I don't know, the best player in the country. Even if you're just like, okay, he played shit against Vanderbilt. That's not ideal, but people aren't breaking down the Vanderbilt tape. You're watching him against Georgia. You're watching him against last year's Michigan team. You're watching him against Texas. Like, those are the games that matter to you because Vanderbilt doesn't have any NFL guys. And that's where I think sometimes these conversations, Shedeur is a good example. When I was talking to Buddy, I was like, I like Shedeur just like everybody else. I like Travis Hunter too. Travis Hunter's not playing NFL people in the Big 12. There aren't really NFL people in the Big 12. They had 31 players drafted total. For example, the SEC had 80. So, I mean, and 2 of those were obviously, or multiple were Colorado guys. So you have to balance it. If Shedeur had done what he had done in the SEC, you couldn't bypass the talent because you're like, he's throwing these touchdowns. But the conference he's doing it against, I'm sorry, fair or not, he doesn't get that much respect in the conference. You get way more respect. It's like, well, Jalen Milroe has been a multi-year starter at Alabama. It's just way harder to play in that conference. Quinn Ewers was just so bad, Carson Beck, but they get a lot of respect playing in that conference if you just play well. But he played really bad. And like you said, Ewers, I mean, he made one of the biggest throws of the year in that game against Arizona State where it looked like they were going to lose on like 4th and 10 or whatever.
Yeah.
But it'd be like, it was Arizona State, not Georgia. That's and fair or not, you get judged by the competition. This is not where in the NFL, even if you're playing Jacksonville, they got a lot of good players. It's not like that in college football, right? So it's the discrepancy in the draft by the conference.
Well, listen,
the Big 12 is not a good conference,
about,
Colin, at all.
Think about this. Ashton Genty, everybody in the NFL kept telling me it's the Oregon game.
Yeah.
If he doesn't play Oregon, because he wasn't dominant against Penn State, if he doesn't play Oregon, there's a lot more questions. Everybody went to the Oregon game and went, well, shit, they got defensive linemen that are pros, corners that are pros, and he was great against Oregon. That
you hear a lot drafted. Like the Bowling Green tight end gets drafted or whoever, some of these smaller school guys. It's like, well, look at when they played Penn State and when they played Michigan. Khalil Mack, who played at Buffalo, he had 3 sacks against Ohio State. I think Taylor Decker was their offensive tackle. So, like, no one cares about the other games in the MAC, right? I mean, they judge your attributes and stuff. But, yeah, like you said, Ashton Genty ran all over the Washington States and San Diego States. He ran for 2 bills against Oregon. And Dan Lanning, you hear all these coaches in these press conferences, he's really highly thought of, the way he runs his program, how good his players are. So I think people struggle. Like, not all things are equal. Georgia, look at Ole Miss. Look how many guys Lane Kiffin had drafted. That conference, this argument about the SEC, like, it ended a long time ago. They have the best players by a mile in it. Honestly, it's not even close. I mean, look at 2 of the best players on Ohio State. They got Downs from Alabama and the running back from Ole Miss. So it's like, what are we talking? And the Big Ten's clearly a high-level conference. But the ACC, with Florida State down and Clemson not being what it was, it's kind of fallen off a cliff. It used to be almost felt like 3 conferences. The ACC was kind of right there with the Big Ten and
the ACC games can be a rough watch.
If you add up, Colin, the ACC and the Big 12, 42 and 31 total drafted players, that's 73. That's only 2 more total than the Big Ten, and that's 6 less than the SEC. That's combining the other 2 Power 4 conferences. That's a pretty big gap. Doubling it in terms of pros?
Yeah. As always, great stuff, buddy.